Hello. In this video, uh, I'm going to go over. Um, I'm going to give an overview on how uh, DuranDuranbot um, uh, composes music. Um, I said in my most previous video that I would I would I'd go into more detail on how exactly DuranDuranbot uh, generates a part which is in between two parts and composes how based off of what the surrounding parts are. So, for instance, um, you have a part in between two parts, and it'll compose based on what the compositions of the surrounding parts are. And I find that to be really amazing. That's a really cool and amazing way of uh, of an intelligent way for an AI assisted composition, um, where no matter where you generate a part in a piece, um, it'll always at least in theory. It does do that. No matter where you generate a new part in a piece, um, it'll always uh, it'll always have a uh, it'll always have like relevancy in relation to the piece. Like it's not going to just be a random part, a piece of like music that you're basically injecting into a certain area of a piece of music. It's uh, it it yeah. I mean, um, it's I just find it really intelligent. I guess I don't know. Um, but yeah, if you're interested in exactly what I'm talking about, you can go to around 5 minutes into around 4 or 5 minutes into my most previous video. I talk about exactly what I just mentioned about how when you generate a new part in a piece, no matter where it's located in the piece, um, the part will like compose itself based on the area of the piece that it's in. And yeah, like I'm thinking about it now, and that's just totally amazing. Uh, it's really cool. And now in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how that does that. Um, I was thinking about making like some kind of like diagram or something like on the computer, but like to show to like illustrate it. But I don't think that's necessary, and I figured I'd outline it in the code, um, just in case anyone wanted to know how the code works. And yeah, so okay, um, so what it does is when DuranDuranbot um, trains itself. At the moment, it's not. Uh, well, at the moment, um, well, for instance, I mean, okay, so let me explain how how it trains itself using machine learning and how it applies it to composing music. So, um, So say you have a piece that you generated, or DuranDuranbot generated, and you decide you want to train DuranDuranbot based off of a certain area of the piece it just generated that you liked, and you want it to do, and you want DuranDuranbot to act more like to compose more like the area of the piece that you like. So what you do, well, you train it, and how it would train itself is it would take the section of the piece that you like, and it would um, it would uh, it would look through the different types of it would look through all the different intervals so of notes that it used to compose. So um, so let's say you have two instruments playing their own parts in a composition. So uh, so you're doing machine learning. So you're training it on a certain section that you like, and so what it would do is it would look at a note, and it would look at the previous note before that note, the note that we're focusing on, and it would note it. It would take note of the interval between those two notes, and so when it composes, if um, so uh, if a certain note, if you're on a certain note, then a certain interval, and when it composes, if you're on a certain note, its machine learning data will tell you if it's trained, if the data is trained, um, it will tell you what interval, the interval, like say, and I do it in MIDI numbers. So say you have note 44. That's a MIDI number. That's a MIDI note. I'm not sure what note that is, but so you have so you're currently on note 44. So DuranDuranbot during composition will the writing process will notice that that it's that the current note is 44, and it will apply what interval should the interval between that note and the next note and the future note. And let's say it learned that the interval should tend to be 10. So it would uh, it would apply an interval of 10 to that note to create a note 10 steps or half steps, whatever, um, uh, above or below that note, and that would be the next note. So it so yeah. So I mean, in a way, I guess machine learning, it's memorizing. Oh, I also want to say that yeah. So okay, so it machine learning, it memorizes and um, uh, structures data in a way. Um, so it allows like tendencies like during the composition process, and to achieve that, we use weighted weighted arrays, like weighted I guess weighted probability. So yeah, and say you have a note, and based on off of a weighted probability, it chooses like it tends to choose certain intervals over others. based on what the circumstances of the composition is during the writing process, in the middle of a writing process. And not only does it do that for like a previous note or previous notes in a linear progression of a monophonic like progression of notes, like one note going from one note to another note. It also does that for harmonies. So I guess like so yeah, I mean I think you get the idea. Like it's related to intervals and stuff like that. So and yeah, so that's how it uses machine learning. That's how it machine learns, and that's how it uses machine learning to create a piece that's attuned to someone's preferences. Now, how DuranDuranbot composes, it's so using machine learning data is a part of how it composes. Like like how it actually composes music. So when so we're going to take, for example, I mean, DuranDuranbot currently composes in two slightly different ways. They're mostly the same. I mean, fundamentally they're the same, but but the assisted composition, the AI assisted composition, where DuranDuranbot works with you to compose a compose a piece. That's I mean, you have that versus where DuranDuranbot composes fully by itself. And we're not going to talk about the latter. We're going to talk about how DuranDuranbot assists you in composing and how it composes. So and we're going to talk about how it so we're going to do that. So it's mostly similar. It's pretty much exactly the same fundamentally to how DuranDuranbot composes on its own. It's just it's slightly different, but it's fundamentally the same. I'll explain that at some point, probably, maybe. But yeah, we're just going to talk about the AI assisted composition process at this point in time. So, okay, so I'm going to give a brief overview. So, so when you compose a part, it will. This is how it does it. So, let's say you have a part, and then you create you have part one of a song or a piece, and you composed a piece of music with it into that part, and then you create a new part, which is part two. So what it does is okay, so I said in the beginning of the video that I was going to talk about how DuranDuranbot composes and how it composes and links how it composes in relation to where it is in a piece. So okay, so you have a part one which has audio in it, and then part two which is empty, and then you have part three which has audio in it. So when you compose part two, and this is how it works with pretty much with any part. So when you just click on Generate New in the assisted composition program, it looks at so first, and this is the code that in which it does it. So first, it looks at the most the notes which end. So you're in part two and you're generating you're composing for part two, and part 1 and 3 are already composed. So when you compose part 2, it looks at the last notes of part 1 and the first notes of part 3, and it composes based off of those notes. And this is the okay. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what like these are so exactly what is what. So these are functions. I'm trying to figure out what does what. So okay. Okay. So this is the higher order function, in which all the functions on this page are used within. So okay, and this is like the main function. This is the main function right here. Assisted comp part func. So what it does is I currently have 2 settings. Okay, I realize that not everyone knows how to code in SuperCollider. So but I'll just I guess I'll just go over it. You don't need to. I'm just going to go over it. You could just listen to what I'm saying and stuff. So okay. So so when you compose a piece in a part which is surrounded by 2 pieces of audio, other parts which have audio in them. First, what the second part does is find the last notes of the previous sequence or the previous part. So in part 2's case, it finds the last notes of uh, part 1. And I forgot to mention this before, but machine when it trains itself and when it composes, it utilizes machine learning data of the intervals between notes and between harmonies, and also the durations of notes between notes, note changes, and note intervals. And there's also a third, I guess, variable or whatever you want to call it, like a third aspect of machine learning, which is something else, which I'll talk about after I talk I'll talk about that when during my explanation right now of how it works. So yeah, I just figured I'd mention that. So yeah, but to summarize what I just said, intervals between notes is not the only thing it trains itself on and composes on with. Like it uses intervals between notes, time durations of notes, and another factor. So okay, so when you click on a generate new for part 2, in between part 1 and part 3, which already have compositions in them, you find the last notes and last time durations of part 1, of the last notes of part 1, and and then and then uh, and you use these functions above here to do that. So last notes function, you find the last note, the last part, and then you search for what intervals and times are in the last few notes of of part one, and then you use this function to do that. So then once you find, so yeah, so this is what this evaluates that what I just said, and so okay, so you find, okay, so again, you find the last notes and times of the previous part, which would be part one, and then what it does is it generates a it generates a composition. It composes using the machine learning data. So so it composes using its machine learning data. So once you find the last notes and times of another factor of I guess, if you once you find the attributes of the last few notes of the most previous part, it then composes a composition, like a part. It composes a part in here, and then what it does is it finds it does the same thing, but for the beginning notes of part three. Part three being the next part. And then it creates another composition based on those notes that it found in part three. So what it did was it created two different compositions. So we only want one composition, but DuranDuranbot for part two created two compositions, one based off of just part one, and one based off of the last notes of part one, and then another composition based off of the first notes in part three. So you get what I'm saying, and it does this in order to compose based off of the area of the part of the piece that it's in, that being part two, in between part one and three, which already have compositions in them. So what it does, so as I said before, it created two different parts, one based off of the last notes in part one, and one composition based off of the first notes in part three. And so it creates two different compositions. So it does that for a reason, and I'm going to go over exactly what it does. So I guess I'll just tell that now. So it does that because okay, well, so I guess I'll just tell you how what happens after. So it does that, and then what it does is it reverses the composition which was based off of part three. And the reason I did that was, yeah, so, and then what I do is, so I just reversed the part 3 composition. I basically just, it's a composition that goes in a certain direction, and I completely reverse it, where it's basically just turned around, and the last part is the beginning part. And then what I do is I blend the two arrays. I blend I blend the two compositions, which are in arrays. They're you know they're in you know yeah I blend the two compositions. Which the first composition being the composition which was based off of part 1, and then the second composition would be the reverse composition, which was based off of part 3, and I blend them. So I do that to maintain continuity from part 1, 2, and 3, like from part 1 to 3 in part 2. So, like I do that to maintain continuity throughout the piece. So it's not part 2 isn't just some random composition that has nothing to do with the parts that it's surrounded by, which are part 1 and part 3, and how it blends the two arrays. So I also like to just explain why I reversed part 3 and then blended the first composition, which stemmed from part 1, and and then I blended that with the second composition, which was reversed, which was taken from part 3. So, well, yeah, I mean, so I did it because, well, I already explained, I guess, why I did that. I mean, I did it to create a part which I guess ties in to every other part, and I think that doing that it does that. It maintains consistency. Like it's like I mean it's maintaining a kind of, I guess, story in a way between the parts which you created the part in between. So part 2 in between part 1 and 3. That's why I created two arrays and I blended them. I think it's pretty simple to understand why I did that. I mean, really, it's just a way to compose a piece of music based off of the parts which surround it. So yeah, and I mean, yeah, and so I mean, yeah, and it uses its machine learning to compose every part that's generated, and yeah, so it does that, and it blends the two parts, the first forwards part, and then the second part, the first composition forwards, and the second composition reversed from part 3. So it blends those two arrays, those two parts, those two compositions, they're not parts, they're compositions. It blends them by taking each note and like taking each note which are parallel to each other in the two different compositions, and takes the average note, and that's the new note. And it does that for every note in these two arrays, in these two compositions. So it's and then when it does that, you basically, I guess, just force blended two different parts. And then once you do that, I added a third thing which it does, or I added a sequential thing which that does. And for every note that you just blended, it then uses machine learning data to then change the interval, or to take to add or subtract a certain interval away from that note, and it uses machine learning data to do that. And this is the part, and I mean this is the part in which it does that. Yeah, so like it adds the part, then divides by 2 right here. So yeah, and it finds the interval. Yeah, so I mean, okay, yeah, so this does exactly what I just said it does. It blends the part. So yeah, so it reversed that second part that came from part 3, and then blends the two arrays in here, the two compositions, and then and it blends it by finding the average of parallel notes in the two compositions, and then for the resulting note, for the resulting note that you get after doing that, you then add or subtract a certain interval, which DuranDuranbot learned to do, or which would tend to do. Yeah, so yeah, so that's how it works, and that's how it generates a part to coincide with the area of the piece that it's in. And maybe there's better ways to do that than the way I just said. The way I just said, it's not that complicated. And in a way, I think it might be kind of elementary, maybe. But I don't know. I mean, it is what it is, and I don't see anything wrong with it. It's not complex at all, in a way. But yeah, I mean, I just went over about how that works. I think I went over it pretty well, I hope. But yeah, just to summarize again, like give a brief summary. So when you compose a piece of music in between two already composed pieces of music, like parts, that's what I'm talking about. First, what it does is it finds the last notes of part 1. Like say you're in part 1, you're composing for part 2. It finds the last notes of part 1 and the first notes in part 3, and then it uses those two sections of notes and to creates two different compositions stemming from those notes using DuranDuranbot's machine learning data. So it composes stemming from those two different sections of notes. and then you reverse the part 3. You reverse the composition that you generated from part 3, and because I mean you're generating a composition from the first part, from the first notes of part 3. So you're generating, like, really, I guess, backwards. That's what you're doing. So that's why I reverse the composition which stems from part 3, because that's what so yeah, and then after you generate those two compositions, then you blend them by overlapping each composition. The part 1 composition, the part that the composition which stemmed from part 1, and the composition which stemmed from part 3, which was reversed. You overlap them, and each parallel note in each composition is, you find the average of the notes. So you have like MIDI notes. So you have 44 and you have 54. Those are the two notes. Those are the two parallel notes between the two parts, in the two parts. And you find the average of those two notes. And then you add or subtract the resulting note by a certain interval, let's say like 5 or something. I mean, and it does this using its machine learning data. So in certain circumstances, it will. So given like the intervals of the original two parallel notes, it will, and prior notes actually. But that's I didn't mention that before. But that's how it finds the note which will be added or subtracted to the resulting average notes after the two compositions are blended. Yeah, I just do that, as another way of as, like, I guess, another step in composing, I guess. So yeah, I mean, so yeah, that's how it works. Yeah, so to reiterate the last part I just said, so it takes the two parallel compositions which were just overlapped, and it takes the note each note parallel to each other in these two different compositions, and then finds the average, and then it adds or subtracts that resulting note by a certain interval using machine learning data. So yeah, that's how it does that. So that's how it finds. So that's how we maintain I guess, like, like how we maintain. That's how we make part 2, like a part in between two parts, make sense in between those two parts. So that's how we make a part fit in with the rest, with the area in which it's composing in a full piece. Yes, that's how it does that. So and it does that using all this code, and it's in the file called assisted comp part func.scd. So if you're interested, yeah. So that's about it. Maybe I'll talk about other stuff. I don't know. So that's it. All right. Thanks. Bye.